Right, hey guys, how we doing? Back another video from Totally Not Mark, and today we are checking out the crazy story of Dragon Ball's music. Be interesting. I do believe the Dragon Ball Z review starts this weekend as well, so we'll be checking that out as that comes out. But firstly, let's go into the crazy story of Dragon Ball.
Dragon Ball is unique, and not just because of its spiky-haired, giga-forehead characters. From Japan to America to even little old Ireland over here, it's a story with worldwide appeal like no other. But where it really breaks the mold is an aspect that varies from country to country, series to series, hell, even company to company. And that aspect is, of course, the music. Where most shows may have only one composer, or maybe a couple depending on how many series a story has, Dragon Ball has no such consistency. The original score, the English replacement score, the other English replacement score, the GT score, the other English replacement score, the Super score, the other replacement English score. It is almost baffling how
That's a lot. It's already sounding like a lot.
a little musical consistency this story has over the course of its now multi-decade lifetime. Anime replacement scores were all the rage in the 1990s, but replacement scores aren't simply unique to the "hello fellow kids" attitude of Western anime publishers. Even something as recent as the Justice League movie received a complete rescore between its Whedon cut and the Snyder cut. But the fact is that just about any time an existing work gets its music replaced, one of the versions is largely declared the overwhelming correct music, while
Yeah, people very much do side on like, hey, nah, this music's better than that one. This is the true score.
the other is cast aside into obscurity. In the case of Justice League, even though the Whedon-led Danny Elfman score hit theaters first, you would be hard-pressed to find too many people that prefer it over the junky XL score found in the Snyder cut. So why then? Why does every single Dragon Ball score have its absolute die-hard fans? How does the show get away with jumping from one sound to the next at the drop of a hat and still largely have its music beloved by many? Well, I spent the last couple of weeks diving deep into the history of every single composer for Dragon Ball. It was a lot of work, and
Oh my god, this does sound actually quite interesting. Looking into, so it's going to be interesting, yeah, like why certain people worked on certain things at certain times. Maybe like the personal issues, maybe like there were company issues. Oh man.
not only do I think I have the answer to that very question, but I think the story of these composers says something much more profound about not only soundtracks, but art itself. So strap in, folks, because in preparation for my upcoming long-awaited Dragon Ball Z review series, we are diving deep into the wild and wacky world of Dragon Ball's musical composers.
I hope the review isn't like one big chunky video. I hope it's like a weekly thing. I like checking out those weekly things, like, but if it's a big chunky thing, we'll still check it out anyway.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprising number of composers to talk about today, each with their own span of
many?
the show they covered, history,
many?
unique sound, and place in the story. And where better to start chronologically than the original, the one and the only Shunsuke Kikuchi.
Shunsuke Kikuchi. Yay.
From episode 1 of Dragon Ball right through to when Goku forgot he had a family and left to train Oob, Kikuchi covered everything, even down to the movies and TV specials.
Oh, wow.
But his anime adventures began long before Dragon Ball, producing music for the likes of Tiger Mask, Getter Robo, Doraemon, and the list goes on.
Cool.
In fact, Kikuchi's collaboration with Toriyama didn't even begin with Dragon Ball. The man has been around since the Dr. Slump days.
Oh, wow.
And with a quick listen to his back catalog, it's clear this is a man who knows what he excels at. Crack open the soundtrack
Never heard of Tiger Man. It looks interesting.
to any of the anime I just listed, and you will hear that Kikuchi has always had a very distinct style. Taking advantage of small studio orchestra, his compositions are all but quintessentially 80s lighthearted anime vibes. Vibrant string sections, powerful horns, xylophones, wacky drums, slap bass. Kikuchi used just about every of the era tool at his disposal to craft these
Is that called Kamen Rider? I think it's Kamen Rider, isn't it?
wonderful pieces of music. And with his jump to Dragon Ball, this approach remained the same. What Kikuchi saw in this series was the very same thing many fans at home saw: a fun story of a fearless boy full of adventure and mysticism. His approach to the show remained fairly steadfast for pretty much the entire original Dragon Ball series, steeped in Chinese influence, wuxia films, and kung fu madness. But one thing we should talk about is the concept of instrumentation. Put simply, instrumentation is just what sorts of instruments and sounds you use to create a piece of music. But what's important to understand is that what instruments you use to bring a composition to life is a whole separate beast from the composition itself. Clip your emo fringes on for just a second and think back to the song Never Meant. What notes and rhythms are inside of it are one thing, but how it sounds is also determined by the instrumentation and sounds they chose to bring those notes to life. Take the very same melody and throw in some bluegrass instrumentation, or even Mario 64 instrumentation, and it becomes something very different.
It's completely different, isn't it? Like, yeah, it changes the feel, the mood, the emotion, everything.
The choice of instruments drastically changes the overall feel of the song and composition, and those choices apply to every single composer I will talk about today. On top of his usual approach to instrumentation, Kikuchi whipped out some new sounds for Dragon Ball that have gone on to become synonymous with the property. Spring sounds, slide whistles, the extra iconic Vibra Slap. He really spiced up his usual formula to create a unique sound for Dragon Ball from the outset, one that mixed the grand with the goofy. And as the anime crept into the King Piccolo era, Kikuchi began to dive deeper into the world of motifs, or themes for lack of a better term. In other words, some characters or concepts had their own theme music. While he didn't make use of these themes quite as often as some of the other composers on this list, when he did, oh boy, did it go.
Wow.
By the time Dragon Ball Z rolled around, Kikuchi's approach to the series had sort of evolved to match the evolution of the series itself. Where the show had moved from a lighthearted adventure to a more grisly tale of space monkeys and galactic genocide, so too did Kikuchi move to more dire music, especially in terms of his fight tracks. What's interesting is that much of Kikuchi's music was composed for the Dragon Ball movies and then repurposed into the main show alongside the TV exclusive composition.
Wow, that's interesting. So he did it for the movies, and then like, hey, that's cool. Let's use that as well for the series. What? Wow, what?
This was true all the way back in OG Dragon Ball, but is especially pivotal in the Z era, where a great many of his most beloved and powerful tracks in the anime were originally composed for the movies.
Right.
But this is where things get interesting, because while Kikuchi's score for the show may have started out as largely Chinese influenced, the further he went into Z, the more that shifted. And would you believe me if I told you the direction he ended up going with the most for Z was actually very Western influenced? And I don't mean Western as in Europe and American and all that kind of stuff. I mean literally old school Western movies. Yeehaw, shoutouts at high noon and Clint Eastwood, that sort of shebang. It's not something that you probably think of when you think of Dragon Ball Z's Japanese music, but the influences are all over the place. While there are definitely more musically fundamental influences I could point to, you don't even need to dig that deep. By the final stages of Z, the music was so Western that I could swear a tumbleweed was going to sail by while Vegeta monologues here.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Shunsuke Kikuchi for most of the world is Dragon Ball.
Definitely get that Western feel from that. Yeah, like I remember going around with my nan and granddad's me down. I'd have like a random Western movie on sometimes and go see them and like, yeah, that's very... Whoa.
He is as much a part of Dragon Ball as Toriyama or Masako Nozawa. The unmistakable identity that he brought to the series is something that is really hard to overstate. He did so much. I mean, it's just insane. Over 500 individual pieces of music over the course of around a decade. 500. All evolving with the story where appropriate. His tenure in the world of Goku and Co. is legendary. But then, why is this not the end of the video? Well... Jumping into 1996, Z just wrapped up in Japan and America's finally ready to give this series its big push.
But we need more English sounding music, I guess.
Funimation's first attempt with original Dragon Ball didn't work with only minor changes, so what did Gen Fukunaga decide to do next? Well, he teamed up with the Canadian Ocean Group to work on retooling the show, and with that came a drastic overhaul to the music. Welcome to the stage, Ron Wasserman. Not only did Wasserman compose the iconic Rock the Dragon, but the entire portion of this Ocean Funny Sabin run, from Raditz through to Ginyu. I'm sure many of you now are going, hold up, isn't Shuki Levi the one who did this stuff? And you wouldn't be wrong if you simply looked at the credits, but plot twist, Wasserman actually composed those pieces uncredited for reasons unknown to me, but possibly something to do with rights and royalty access. But hey, I'm sure uncredited composers won't be a recurring theme or anything later.
I feel like they will be.
This isn't the first time Wasserman has worked with Sabin either, though. Remember Go-Go Power Rangers? Well, that's him. But actually, unlike his work in this era that sported your typical 90s cartoony power rock tunes, Wasserman's music for Z was a total swerve. The score was frantic, spacey, otherworldly. And whether that was his direction or someone from above's, someone on the team saw this series as a big old sci-fi space opera.
Yeah, it's giving me like Transformers the movie from 1986 vibes.
What's kind of crazy is that in spite of this big shift in tone, the music was largely well received at the time, as was the product as a whole. I mean, this thing has drastically different characterization and wacky censorship on top of this insane music. But actually, I think this unrestrained retooling is why people vibed with it so much. It all meshed together in a way that was coherent in spite of being so different.
Thing is, though, as well, this would have been like first time viewing for people as well in the West, wasn't it? So like this would just be accepted as the norm and there wouldn't be any other double thinking about the music choices in that.
And I think that's the key here, because although he will soon be replaced with a certain mustachioed fan favorite, this musical approach will serve as the blueprint for almost every American score on the series going forward.
Right.
Vegeta, what does the scouter say about his power level? It's over 9,000!
That's right, the year is still 1996. Wow, Dragon Ball composers were busy in that year, weren't they? And surprise, Goku is a kid again, and Vegeta has grown a mustache in honor of a certain US composer. But what's this? Our beloved Kikuchi has retired, and now, for the first time, Dragon Ball needs a new sound.
My God.
Bring on Akihito Tokunaga.
Alright, let's go.
So, now would be the time to talk about Tokunaga's vast history of composing, but I can't because he doesn't have any. So it turns out when Toei hired him for Dragon Ball GT, this man had composed nothing. He was just a bassist in some band, and I mean, he has some songwriting credits here and there, but that was kind of it. I have searched high and low to try to understand why he was hired in the first place, but my best guess is that because he composed some music for the band Zard, of whom did GT's second ending, as well as wrote the lyrics for the opening. So I guess he got in that way, maybe?
That's mad. That is absolutely insane. What? Some random bass player got picked to compose the... That has blown my brain.
I really have no idea, but I think that's what makes this guy so interesting. I mean, imagine being in this position. You're playing bass in some band, and then all of a sudden, you're given the helm to the successor of one of the most popular shows in the world. Like, what? This guy was thrown right into the deep end, charged with composing a score for both the GT and the big anniversary movie, Path to Power, simultaneously.
Whoa.
That's an unfathomable level of stress, and yet he dove in head first. And well, the results aren't exactly spectacular. Reception for the Dragon Ball GT score was middling at best, and even today it's hardly noteworthy compared to its contemporaries. While his approach isn't too dissimilar to Kikuchi's in terms of tone and instrumentation choice, his work with synthesized instrumentation compared with Kikuchi's real deal left things feeling understandably flat in comparison. And what hurts the most is really just how short his story is. After the movie and those initial TV compositions, his contributions to the show completely ceased. Even a new track on the GT special was just an unused piece from his original run. From the beginning through to the end, the series reused piece after piece to the point that it really began to sour audiences on it. Like, imagine writing fun and adventurous tunes for the lighthearted first arc only to have it reused in the final arc where my boy Vegeta's being shish kebabbed. I mean, it's not exactly ideal. GT's production has always been a strange one of uncertainty and ever-changing approaches, but unfortunately, documentation on the music remains lacking. Tokunaga still writes and performs in his band to this very day, so it does certainly seem like they heard his initial output, weren't into it, and dropped him like a ton of bricks. I personally may not love his music for the show, but that's still a thought that saddens me. He was never really given the chance to see it through and evolve his craft, an opportunity afforded to a certain someone on the other side of the world later. But for now, I must ask you to strap in for arguably the most fascinating score covered today.
Okay.
The year is now 1999, and over in the land of apple pie and incorrectly named football, Funimation has decided trips to Canada are too much effort and expensive, and so, in true capitalist fashion, they've culled their Ocean Group relationship and decided to produce their own dub for cheap in-house. And with those new voice actors came the mustache man himself, Bruce Faulkner.
Okay. Alright.
This man right here took over the Dragon Ball Z score from Ginyu, all the way to the end of Z, and has cemented himself in the Western world as one of the most recognizable and iconic parts of Dragon Ball Z. Born in Dallas, Texas to a naval aviator father, he... Wait a second. Who are these guys? Well, the long and fascinating history of the Faulkner Productions composers and credit woes is big enough that you'll get a full rundown in its own dedicated video in the future. But
okay, cool.
Let's get one thing straight. You see these names? These guys are the actual composers for 99% of the Faulkner score you may know and love.
Right.
Mr. Mustache actually composed only a few tracks for the show's entire run, and despite this, his name is all over the various CDs and credits lists.
That just seems wrong to me. That seems rather wrong and naughty. Naughty and wrong. In a bad way.
Despite their unique and rich history, the three composers who created this now famous soundtrack are largely unknown to the greater fandom thanks to this distinct lack of clear crediting. Wait, maybe this is a recurring theme. With this takeover during the Namek arc, it was initially only Mr. Smith at the helm, producing music very much in line with the predecessor Ron Wasserman. So much so that I honestly wouldn't be surprised if that was a requirement from above to smooth over the transition for the audiences. But hey, don't get me wrong, this wasn't simply a copycat situation either. Smith sure put his own spin on things by pushing that 90s sound to the max with a wide array of awesome synths, pads, and all the crazy awesomeness associated with this era. He really favored...
Giving me Doctor Who vibes. You know what I mean?
Melody-driven affairs, which is not only conducive to memorable music, but played a key part in him creating some of the show's most iconic themes. I mean, this score as a whole is truly theme-central, and I think that's a large part as to why it stayed in the English-speaking fandom's consciousness for decades now. The Dragon Ball theme, Vegeta's theme, the Super Saiyan theme, Gohan's theme, whatever theme comes to mind, there's a very good chance it was Mike Smith who put it together. Of course, Smith wasn't the only name on this list though, and as the show progressed, the group found themselves with another composer in their ranks, Scott Heavy Metal Morgan. His work really started in full swing once we left the Frieza arc, and where Mike was...
What a middle name, hey?
...was all about melody, Scott was all about mood. Dark and ethereal. This man's music truly set the tone for whatever scene they appeared in. Where Smith would pen a wild piano riff for Vegeta's Super Saiyan theme, Morgan would take a wildly different approach to character themes. What's kind of neat is that out of all the composers on this roster, Scott Morgan was the only one who could play guitar. So if you ever hear one ripping and tearing up the score, you'll know for certain it's him. And oh boy, did those skills lead to some incredibly intense scenes.
Cool.
As the show hit the Boo arc, the team gained its final composer.
I love how consistent he is with that whole, every time the Boo arc's mentioned, just picture of Boo just covering the thing. Consistency is key. Genius. Nice one, Mark.
Bose. This man has a long history of work
Or whoever's editing the videos.
working with synthesized music already, and he put that into immediate use here, almost reinventing the sound of the score in this arc. Ironically though, this reinvention made things less synthetic, instead bringing in aspects like traditional horns and strings to the mix, resulting in the entire crew doing something entirely new. But perhaps the most unique element of this score comes from the constraints they were given. Gen Fukunaga insisted the music be non-stop wall-to-wall in its placement, no silence allowed. And as a result, the gang took a lot of care to write much of their music to scene. If you're not
That's mad though, because sometimes silence can really add to a moment as well, and having music consistently there is a bit annoying at times, but...
aware, most scores for a TV series are written independently of what's going on screen, instead building up a pool of music for various types of scenes that a director can pull from to use where appropriate. The only exception often being for important scenes where the composer will pull up an episode and compose to the specific timing of that scene. In the Faulkner score's case, the cinematic approach of composing the footage was not the exception, but the norm. Pieces were written to transition seamlessly, and the team would often reinvent previous tracks to specifically match unique character beats. Sometimes that would even mean a particular track played once in the entire show. Say what you will about whether the score fits Dragon Ball or not, but this team really gave it their absolute all, and it truly shows. The score is genuinely one of the most fascinating on the list today, not just because of its crazy credit scandal or replacement score ethic debates, but because it's the only one on the list with multiple composers. That in and of itself makes it unique, and while I've kind of zoomed through these details today, know that the more you dive into this, the more interesting it ultimately becomes.
Seems it. There's like a lot going on. There's a lot going on. A lot of people not credited. Reasons why. Why have just one name? Easier, but still a bit weird.
More than Wasserman or even Tokunaga, I think this score proved that the world of Dragon Ball can support a wide variety of sounds. While many will argue it succeeded because it was more suited to Western audiences, I think Kikuchi's prevalence in every other Western country shows that not to be the case. This score actually succeeds on its own merits because those involved genuinely poured their heart and soul into every step of the production. And so now, like all good anime, this story comes with a time skip. The year is 2005, and an American composer is about to live out the very existence Tokunaga was denied. This is Nathan Johnson.
Seth the programmer's outro. Ooh, remember that guy?
So, tell me if this one sounds familiar. Composing credits before Dragon Ball? 0. Legitimate reasons to be hired to compose for Dragon Ball? 0.
Oh, wow.
Reception of their initial work? Not great. Yep, you got it. Nathan Johnson is Tokunaga 2.0.
Okay.
The story behind his being hired for the show is somehow the most insane one yet. In 2005, Funimation decided to redub the Wasserman era episodes with their in-house voice cast and naturally needed a new replacement score to match. Out of options and desperate for answers, one day a Funimation exec was talking to one of his tenants for a house he was landlording over, and well, this guy said he owned a keyboard and would love to do music. And that was it. I wish I was joking, but this is straight from the
No. That's even crazier than just being a bass player in a band. He was just...
horse's mouth. Johnson got hired on as a complete fluke, and with absolutely zero professional experience. His work on the show was, well, I think this is probably the chunk of music that has the fewest fans of anyone I'll talk about today.
Okay.
His approach seemed to more or less be the same as the ethereal synth-heavy Wasserman score that he was replacing. And while that makes sense from a logistical standpoint, you don't want your replacement score to be too jarring to those who watched the older dub back in the day. Let's just say his execution left a lot to be desired. But this is where the story of Tokunaga and Nathan Johnson diverge. Because where Tokunaga was seemingly cast aside after a bad initial outing, Funimation stuck with Johnson for a good while.
Oh, wow.
After his initial poor work in the Saiyan saga, he was tasked with doing the rescores for a bunch of the Z movies. With each successive outing, he became more and more familiar with the show itself, and better as a result. He focused on more traditional orchestral sounds, honed his writing and mixing abilities, and started to really shine. By the time Fusion Reborn rolled around, he was producing a score so well regarded that I don't think a lot of English fans even realized that it's a replacement score. With Wrath of the Dragon, the show said goodbye to Johnson and goodbye to the practice of replacement scores. The music departments were being shut and the industry moved to keep anime's original music. But I think this final score here was a great farewell. Not just as a great story of redemption for the man, but as a genuinely excellent piece of film score. Powerful string melodies, timpanis, all sorts of impactful sounds were brought together for this very score. Johnson even learned to play the ocarina for composing his Tapion theme.
Cool.
For too long, you fed on the misery of others. You stole from me everything precious and dear, but no more. It ends now.
The transformation from where he
What a
began to
movie.
where he ended up is just remarkable. It's a fate that I wish we could have seen Tokunaga live out, but I'm glad nonetheless that Johnson was given the chance to walk his path and evolve his craft. Of course, nowadays he is a literal state senator, but I'd be willing to bet he could still whip up a mean movie score if he so chose. And with that, we have officially finished off our Dragon
He's a state senator, and he did. Imagine that.
Ball Z composers. But as you know, Dragon Ball didn't end there. In fact, before any of this Dragon Ball Super business, the series saw a revival in the form of Dragon Ball Kai. Wait, shit, that's still Z. And for this big revival, Toei brought in sleeper agent Kenji Yamamoto. Out of everyone on this list, Yamamoto has by far the most storied history with Dragon Ball upon his hiring. None of this had never heard of the show before business. Yamamoto came onto Kai having already worked with the series for over 2 decades.
Oh, right.
For years, he had been the go-to composer for pretty much every Dragon Ball video game in existence, as well as a composer for a big chunk of the original show's insert songs. Yamamoto had been with Dragon Ball for so long at this point, he was almost as synonymous with the series as Kikuchi. So it was a natural choice to bring him on for Kai. And once he started, it did not take him long to get going. Having that level of familiarity with the franchise really allowed him to burst onto the scene and make an immediate impression on all who watched. His score was big, grand, bombastic, and almost filmic. Horns, strings, drums, cello, the whole soundscape came together to create a score that felt like what those before it tried and failed to sort of achieve. From high energy fight tracks to genuinely emotional beats, he really hit it all. Unfortunately though, for how beloved this score is among fans of all generations, there are a lot, and I mean a lot, of asterisks with Yamamoto and his Kai score. The first and most obvious one is that, well, if you watched Kai on Blu-ray, there's a good chance you simply have never heard his music before. Yamamoto scored the entire original Kai series all the way through to Cell, but years later, some videos over on the Japanese web started going viral. Videos that compared and highlighted that a lot of his music was completely plagiarized. And I'm not talking isolated incidents either. Even as far back as his insert songs in the 1980s, this man was taking existing tracks and just copy-pasting them onto Dragon Ball.
Oh, that's
These
bad.
comparison clips really took off in Japan, which alerted Toei to his stealing and led to them replacing his Kai score with reused Kikuchi music. How about that? A replacement score using an original score. But again, it really is insane how often and direct these plagiarized songs were for Kai. It is just everywhere.
Whoa.
And yet that still isn't the end of the asterisks for poor Kenji. Even aside from his plagiarism, or perhaps as a direct result of it, the other major failing with his Kai score is how short the track count actually is. For his entire Saiyan to Cell run, he only managed to produce a few dozen tracks for the show, which naturally meant the directors had very little to work with as far as making sure the music was diverse enough to fit the scene. Worse still, of the tracks that he did create, many of them did not live up to the best of his output, and couldn't really be used in most cases to begin with. So all in all, you ended up with a stolen score that, while containing very high highs, is just riddled with hearing the same tracks over and over and over again. Despite all of this, I don't think Yamamoto's Kai score is bad by any means. I think as long as we ignore the literal theft bit, some of his highlight tracks are among the best music ever produced for the show. It is just, there's a lot of asterisks. It really is hard to speak in detail about his contributions to the series without a baker's dozen buts. Now, of course, this all meant that poor Toei had burned through yet another failed attempt at establishing a post-Kikuchi composer for the show. They really just couldn't catch a break, could they? Flash forward to 2012 and Toriyama's pissed off and rewriting Battle of Gods in the name of avoiding Dragon Ball Evolution 2.0.
Yeah, wow.
With Yamamoto banished to the home for infinite thieves, Toei now has another chance to find the de facto modern Dragon Ball composer, one that will define this modern era of Dragon Ball, and this man of course is Norihito Sumitomo.
Okay. Oh, cool. I love that tune. That track's class. Cool.
At this point, Sumitomo has been the sound of Dragon Ball for a surprisingly long amount of time. He was introduced in Battle of Gods a decade ago, and the positive reception there meant that he has continued working on the series ever since. But just like those that came before him, his journey is a storied one, and one that didn't start off on the best of terms. His initial work on Battle of Gods was largely well liked actually, whether it be the fun slice of life sections or the insane grand piano moments. This sparse but memorable score was a solid starting point for this man's Dragon Ball journey.
Well, I do. I do give up. I've given all I've got, Lord Beerus, but there's still no way I can beat you.
Unfortunately for old Sumi here, Funimation were hungry for more Kai given its huge success in the West, and so Toei relented with Kai, the final chapters, leading to our man needing to compose a whole soundtrack for the Buu arc alongside the upcoming Resurrection F film. As I'm sure you can imagine, that meant schedules were tight, and while Sumitomo might be talented, there's only so much one can do in such a limited time frame.
Wow, it's been so long I hardly recognize you. So, how are things going?
As a result, both Buu Kai and Resurrection F scores were pretty significant steps down. Only a few months following Freezy Pop's revival movie, Dragon Ball got itself a brand new anime. I don't think I need to tell you all what the production schedule was like for that, but yeah. While the show melted on our screens for several months, I think many of us forgot that every aspect of the production was affected by this disastrous environment, leading to just as many viral music hilarities as there were animated ones. There's a common sentiment that Sumitomo got better as the show went on, but if you look at his lengthy history of composing prior to Dragon Ball Super, you will find music that seems completely foreign to what you heard here and in Kai. Absolute worlds of quality apart. Where he was once a composer known for strings, piano, rich textures, just about everything you could ask for, his work on Kai and Super was rough, very synthetic, with music that matched the tone of the scene being the rare exception rather than the rule. Thankfully, much like Super's animators found the time to produce excellent work as the schedule improved, so did Sumitomo. And with each passing arc, his work began to jump in quality. In fact, you could argue it was a complete metamorphosis of sorts, as the Goku Black arc found itself with a score completely overhauled from what came before. With the return of traditional string and piano composition, Sumitomo brought about some of the most iconic and powerful music this franchise had ever seen. This transformation continued further as the show hit its final stretch, the universe survival arc. What's important to understand here is that Sumitomo earned his music degree in the States, studying at the prestigious Berklee Music College. This man has been a spectacular solo saxophonist for much of his career, and boy, did he ever put that to use in this arc. That big orchestral sound from the Black Ark was now combined with an incredible jazz-influenced flair, achieving something that I think often goes underlooked. He created an unmistakably unique sound. I think that's why this arc's music sits so fondly in the fandom's minds too. Yamamoto, Tokunaga, just about everyone I've spoken on today has excellent qualities, but as far as Japanese composers go, I don't think anyone since Kikuchi has managed to create something so recognizable. These works weren't just your average anime score, these distinctly, inseparably were Dragon Ball Super. By the time the Broly movie rolled around, Sumitomo had hit critical mass. Taking everything he built up in the TV series, he began to incorporate far heavier uses of themes and motifs, and produced a score that even his loudest detractors collectively agreed was genuinely incredible. It should be clear at this point that Sumitomo is a remarkable talent who faced a terrible production environment at the start of his Dragon Ball venture, but he persisted, putting his all into the show and reinvented his relationship with the property with each passing arc. In a world where a few viral online clips can tarnish your entire reputation, Sumitomo rose above it all, pushed through the hard times, and came out the other side with some truly legendary works of art. Wow. What a crazy history this franchise has, right? Well, there was a lot of people to cover, and yet the keen among you might have noticed a glaring omission. With the release of Dragon Ball Super Super Hero, the series gained yet another composer, Naoki Sato. And I won't be covering him today, but I hope based on everything I've said here, you can at least understand why. Because his journey may very well have only just begun. We don't know whether he will return for any future Dragon Ball productions, but if he does, you can be pretty damn certain that there is more path for him to walk. Because ultimately, music is art, and all forms of artistic expression are living, breathing things. Our relationship with art evolves. Those who continue their pursuits are constantly reinventing themselves and honing their craft in order to deliver a more earnest version of themselves onto the screen. Whether that be composing or illustration or writing, animation, whatever the craft, they all share that same heartbeat. And I think that's why these composers resonate so intimately with me. Every single one of them, barring Yamamoto, were tirelessly dedicated to their craft and, assuming they were given the chance, emerged from their time with Dragon Ball in a far better place than where they started. Dragon Ball itself has been a wonderful home for these artists. It is uniquely welcoming in its ability to house all sorts of sounds and approaches, and really stands as an incredible showcase of those differences. So what is the sound of Dragon Ball? Well, I think that just depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
Some will say Kikuchi, some will say Faulkner, some will even say Sumitomo. And I think that's just an absolutely wonderful thing about Dragon Ball. Just as the original story and art evolved over the course of its lifetime, so too has what any given person can consider to be the sound of Dragon Ball. And so, as I begin to prepare the absolutely colossal Dragon Ball Z review
I can't wait.
series I have in store for you
Series sick, cool.
all next week, I will leave you with this quote. A deeply poignant quote from hobbyist turned composer Nathan Johnson of all people. We all think creativity will burst out of you, and those moments happen, but they are far and away the minority of the time. The rest of it is rolling up your sleeves and taking that creative burst and making it something useful. There's a growth and maturing process where you recognize that not everything you say or do is good. In fact, the majority of it is garbage, but some of it really is good.
Okay.
Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next week.
Dragon Ball Z reviews.
Oh, and this guy did the English replacement score for GT. We didn't talk about that.
Oh, okay. Whoa. Fair enough. Fair enough. Cool. Love it. Love learning new stuff about Dragon Ball. It's such a weird history, like man. It's like, you know, and because it's not just like isolated to one country. It's like you go somewhere else and someone else in a different country. So interesting. Very, very cool. Like I said, really looking forward to the Dragon Ball Z reviews. I will be covering them as they come out. Next week's schedule might be a little bit all over the place. I'm going away for 3 days. And I am going away for 3 days to relax. I've done 50 odd hours this week at work and I'm still uploading daily for you guys. I'm a tired boy, but I'll do what I can. I'll try and schedule stuff for while I'm away. But anyway, make sure you check out my Etsy shop. Links in the description for t-shirts and hoodies that I have designed. And thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is the last support channel. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know that you watch, discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys next time.